He has played 23 seasons. He has broken records that once seemed permanent. He has carried franchises, rebuilt legacies, and redefined what a basketball career could look like. But in the summer of 2025, LeBron James sat with something no highlight reel could capture: a body that was finally sending signals he could no longer ignore. Sciatica. Lower back. The right side of his body. For the first time since he was a teenager, he could not start a season. Never in my life since I started playing the game of basketball have I ever not started the season. That sentence alone tells you everything about the weight he was carrying. What made it heavier was the noise building around him. A podcast comment about the modern game's physical demands had quietly ignited something in the people who built the league before him. Words travel differently when you are LeBron James. An observation becomes a declaration. A comparison becomes a challenge. And somewhere in that space between what he meant and what the old guard heard, a confrontation was taking shape, one that would pull in Shaquille O'Neal, Stephen A. Smith, and an entire generation of players who felt their legacy was being quietly rewritten. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, consider subscribing. There is more where this came from. Akron, Ohio did not produce a basketball player. It produced a mindset. LeBron James grew up in circumstances that demanded resourcefulness before talent, resilience before skill. The environment he came from was not a backdrop to his story. It was the foundation of every decision he would ever make. How he responded to criticism, how he protected the people around him, how he built walls when he felt threatened and lowered them only when trust was earned. All of it traces back to a kid who learned early that the world does not hand you anything, and that the only way to control your future is to control your narrative. That instinct to shape the story before someone else does followed him, from Akron to Cleveland to Miami to Los Angeles. It made him one of the most calculated and self-aware athletes the sport has ever seen, but it also planted seeds of friction with people who read that same self-awareness as manipulation. Shaquille O'Neal came from a different kind of tough: military discipline, constant relocation, proving himself in new environments every few years. Stephen A. Smith came from the Bronx, from a household where words were currency and speaking your truth without apology was survival. Three men, three completely different origins, all collision course bound. The NBA LeBron entered in 2003 was already changing. Hand-checking rules were tightening. The physical brutality that defined the 1980s and 1990s was being legislated out of the game, one rulebook revision at a time. LeBron arrived just as the league was reshaping itself around speed, spacing, and skill over size and intimidation. He was perfectly built for what the game was becoming: long, fast, strong enough to play through contact, but skilled enough to avoid most of it. The system did not shape LeBron so much as LeBron, and the system evolved together, each one pulling the other forward into something neither had been before. But the men who came before him were shaped by an entirely different institution. Shaquille O'Neal played in an era where the paint was a war zone, where referees permitted a level of physical contact that today would draw immediate flagrants. That environment did not just test players, it defined them. It created a belief that suffering through physicality was the truest measure of competitive worth. When that same institution later softened its rules and celebrated a new kind of player, the men forged in the old system did not see progress. They saw erasure. And LeBron, whether he intended to or not, became the symbol of everything the new system rewarded. LeBron's podcast comments were not careless. They were precise. He spoke about spread floors, soft tissue injuries, calf strains replacing ankle sprains, and how pace and space basketball places a fundamentally different kind of stress on the human body than the grinding post play of earlier decades. These were not the observations of someone trying to start a fight. They were the observations of a man who has lived inside a professional basketball body for 23 years and paid close attention to every signal it sent him. The tactical evolution he was describing was real. The game had changed. The athleticism required to cover ground on a spread floor, to defend three-point shooters while protecting the paint, demanded something different from a body than absorbing punishment in the post. What LeBron miscalculated was not the argument itself, it was the audience receiving it. Every era believes its version of the game was the hardest. Every generation of athletes carries the quiet conviction that what they endured was singular and irreplaceable. When LeBron framed modern physical demands as distinct from those of the past, the old guard did not hear a tactical analysis. They heard a ranking. And in a sport where legacy is everything, being ranked below the present by one of the game's greatest voices lands with a weight that no amount of clarification can immediately undo. The courtside moment at Crypto.com Arena in March 2025 was the first visible crack. LeBron had heard Stephen A. Smith's criticism of Bronny James on national television that his son belonged in the G League, not the NBA. And when the two crossed paths during a Lakers-Knicks game, LeBron did not pull him aside quietly. He handled it in the open, in front of cameras, in front of witnesses. Smith had offered to take the conversation somewhere private. LeBron declined. That decision to make it public rather than personal said everything about where LeBron's patience had reached. A man who had spent 2 decades carefully managing his image was now letting the friction show. Then came the tunnel. Shaquille O'Neal, according to reports, intercepted LeBron after a game not to debate, not to discuss, but to confront, face to face. The podcast comments had landed like a verdict among retired players, and Shaq had appointed himself the response. 2 fracture points in the same season. One with a broadcaster who questioned his son, one with a Hall of Famer who felt his era had been diminished. Both handled the same way directly, immediately, without the filter LeBron had spent years carefully maintaining. The cracks were no longer hidden. What do you think drove LeBron to handle both moments so publicly? Was it frustration finally overflowing, or a deliberate choice to stop managing the narrative quietly? What rarely gets discussed in the noise surrounding LeBron James is the sheer volume of invisible work that has sustained a 2-3-year career. The hyperbaric chambers, the cryotherapy, the personal chefs and nutritionists and sleep specialists, the hours spent studying film not just of opponents but of his own body, how it moved, where it compensated, what it needed to recover between games. LeBron has treated his physical preparation with the same strategic intelligence he applies to reading a defense. Nothing accidental, nothing left to chance. That level of investment is precisely what he was referencing when he spoke about the modern game's demands. Not that today's players are tougher, but that the science of surviving a long season has evolved into something the previous era never had access to. And yet Shaq's generation had something else entirely. They had no choice but to play through. No load management, no scheduled rest games, no conversation about soft tissue preservation. You dressed, you played, you absorbed whatever the opponent gave you, and you came back the next night and did it again. Both approaches represent a form of discipline that deserves respect on its own terms. The unseen hours look different across generations, one defined by endurance without options, the other by optimization with every resource available. Neither cancels the other out, but in the heat of a tunnel confrontation, that nuance was the first casualty. Kendrick Perkins was on the McDonald's All-American team with LeBron James in 2003. They were teenagers together at the beginning of everything. That kind of shared origin builds a bond that most people assume is unbreakable. But when Perkins offered measured criticism on television years later, their friendship ended, blocked, quietly removed from the circle. To outsiders, it read as sensitivity. To people who understood LeBron's inner world, it read as something more consistent, a pattern of protecting the environment around him with the same intensity he brought to protecting the ball in the fourth quarter. The people closest to him either reinforced his vision or they didn't stay close. Shaquille O'Neal and LeBron never shared a locker room, but they shared a league, a spotlight, and 2 decades of uncomfortable comparison. Shaq wanted LeBron to be something specific, feared, dominant in the way Jordan and Kobe were dominant, psychologically crushing. LeBron became something different, cerebral, collaborative, legacy-conscious, in ways that valued longevity over intimidation. Neither version is wrong, but they are fundamentally incompatible in how they define greatness, which is why every interaction between them carries the tension of 2 men who respect each other's accomplishments, while fundamentally disagreeing about what those accomplishments mean. That disagreement is not personal, it is philosophical. And philosophy, in basketball, cuts deeper than any tunnel confrontation ever could. The 2025 playoffs told a story that no podcast comment could overshadow. LeBron James, 41 years old, having missed the entire training camp and the opening stretch of the regular season with sciatica, came back and helped the Lakers dismantle the Houston Rockets in the first round. Think about the physical and psychological distance he had to travel to get there. A body that had never missed a season opener in 23 years of professional basketball, suddenly grounded. The rehabilitation, the uncertainty, the quiet fear that this time the body might not respond the way it always had. And then the return. Not a cameo, not a symbolic appearance. A genuine, functional, playoff-level performance from a man whose body had every right to be finished. What that return decoded was not just physical resilience, it was competitive identity. LeBron did not come back to prove a point to Shaq or Stephen A., or anyone generating noise around his legacy. He came back because the game is the one space where the narrative belongs entirely to him, where no broadcaster can reframe it, no retired legend can contest it, and no tunnel confrontation can diminish it. The Oklahoma City Thunder swept the Lakers in the second round, and uncertainty now surrounds what comes next. But the fact that he was there at all, that he dragged a compromised body through a full playoff run at 41, is the most honest answer he ever gave to everyone questioning what this era of basketball truly demands. The all-time scoring record, the assists, the playoff appearances across 4 decades, the championships with 3 different franchises. Numbers like these create their own gravity. They pull every conversation toward comparison, toward ranking, toward the endless debate about where LeBron James sits in the hierarchy of basketball's greatest. But the numbers have never captured what it actually cost. The relationships strained by an uncompromising standard. The friendships that dissolved when criticism replaced loyalty. The constant calculation required to protect a legacy while still competing at its highest level. Statistics measure output. They do not measure the weight of carrying that output for 23 consecutive years under the brightest lights the sport has ever generated. What the numbers also never captured was the institutional loneliness that comes with being LeBron James. The Lakers did not hand him a statue conversation when he broke the all-time scoring record. A historic game ball went to someone else in the room. The organization he chose, not the one that drafted him, the one he selected, left him feeling overlooked at the precise moment his career achievement was most undeniable. That detail is not a footnote. It is a window into something the box score will never reflect. The emotional complexity of being the greatest player of your era and still having to fight for the basic acknowledgement that your own franchise should offer without hesitation. Greatness, it turns out, does not protect you from being taken for granted. LeBron James enters his 24th NBA season, carrying more uncertainty than at any point since he was 18 years old, and the whole world was watching. The body that has defied time for 2 decades is now negotiating with it. The franchise he chose is quietly evaluating its future without him at the center. The old guard is louder than ever, and the media voices that once gave him measured coverage have found personal reasons to push back harder. None of that changes what he has built, but all of it shapes what comes next. The question surrounding his 24th season is not simply whether he can still play. It is whether the environment around him, the organization, the relationships, the noise can hold together long enough for the story to end on his term. What the tunnel confrontation, the courtside moment, and the playoff return all share is this. They are chapters in a story that refuses to conclude quietly. LeBron James has never been a quiet story. He came into the league at 18 with the weight of an entire city on his shoulders, and he has never once put it down. Shaq's anger, Stephen A's frustration, the Lakers' institutional tension, these are not signs that his story is ending. They are signs that it still matters enough to fight over. And that, more than any record or ring or ranking, is the truest measure of a legacy that is still being written. If this story moved you, a like means more than you might think. And if you want to see what comes next, we will be here.